Okay, no, wait. Don't go to the comments yet. I'm not saying it's necessarily a good movie. Just hear me out. Universal Studios' claim to fame is monster movies, creature features, and big budget spectacles. And if you go way back, their bread and butter was Gothic horror. Before Universal was Universal, they went by IMP, Independent Moving Pictures. They were spearheaded by Carl Laemmle, and under the IMP label, they produced The Phantom of the Opera in 1925 and Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde in 1913. Movies were barely a thing in 1913, and they were making monster movies, Gothic monster movies. And both of those, Jekyll and Hyde as well as Phantom of the Opera, were adapted from Gothic literature. In the 1930s, the studio produced what many would consider the ultimate Gothic classics, including Dracula, Frankenstein, and the Mummy. The 40s brought us the Wolfman, and in the 50s, we were introduced to the creature from the Black Lagoon. All this to say that if you want your horror movie to thrill your audience, they're the studio that most people think of. It's also worth noting that in the context of this video, many of these movies have been featured in remakes or franchises. Some have been more successful and are beloved, while others miss the mark, but they are always on the lookout for the next blockbuster, and they often turn to books for inspiration. In 1971, a made-for-TV movie called Duel was released. It aired on ABC, but Universal was the production company behind it. It was based on a short story by the same name, and was the directorial debut of one Steven Spielberg. The original cut of the movie was only 74 minutes long, but after it aired on TV, Universal decided they wanted to release Duel in theaters as well. Due to the runtime, additional scenes needed to be filmed to stretch the length out to 90 minutes. But all in all, it was successful enough that this new up-and-comer Steven Spielberg was able to gain a little bit of notoriety. Steven Spielberg's next film, Sugarland Express, was distributed by Universal, though not produced by them. Of course, his first big hit would come the following year, 1975, when Universal Pictures did produce the movie. Thus began a long and successful relationship between the director and the production company. So fast forward about 20 years to 1993, and we get the first Jurassic Park movie. Many would still consider this to be Spielberg's best directorial effort, and it was an indisputable huge moneymaker for the studio. Michael Crichton, author of the novel and co-screenwriter of the film, began working on a sequel to the novel. Universal bought the rights before the book was even completed. This, of course, was The Lost World. Fun tangent, the title for this movie was taken from the Sir Arthur Conan Doyle novel by the same name. And that book was adapted in 1925 by First National Pictures into a silent movie, and it was then remade in 1960 by 20th Century Fox. And it starred
some Indian village out here in the jungle.
It's Klaatu. If you've seen my Day the Earth Stood Still video, you know. Now, are any of the Jurassic Park movies Gothic? No. Are any of them horror? Maybe not entirely. Personally, I consider them to be more action movies, really, than horror movies, although, like, it definitely dips its toe into those waters at certain times. The first scene from Jurassic Park is very similar to the first scene from Jaws, and all of the Jurassic Park movies definitely qualify as creature features. I'm skipping ahead to the first Jurassic World movie. While it was a box office success, most audiences agreed that it didn't quite have the same magic as the original entry. Of course, none of that matters to Universal because they made an ungodly amount of money off of it and immediately got to work on the sequel, Jurassic World: Fallen Kingdom. But on the whole, Gothic sensibilities, while more recently have been making a comeback with films like the 2024 remake of Nosferatu or Del Toro's Frankenstein, in 2018 just wasn't the trend that studios were following. So it was kind of a big swing for Universal to go old school with this one. Now, I tried really hard to find a reputable source for this. I'm taking this from study.com because at least they're not a completely unknown entity. But I wanted a list of what would be considered elements that made a story Gothic. So, according to them, there are 10 of these, and they are a dark setting, romance, supernatural forces, emotional extremes, an anti-hero, female victims, visions and nightmares, madness, gloomy weather, and prophecies and curses. In one way or another, Fallen Kingdom exhibits almost all of these. You kind of have to ignore the first hour of this movie to get to the real meat of the elements. I'm like, fuck the director, J.A. Bayona, for making us witness the absolutely soul-crushing death of this Brachiosaurus. Everyone was upset by this. Everyone.
There's a really dramatic and poignant scene where the last dinosaur stands on the island.
We felt that the audience really need to feel for the dinosaurs, and it was at the same time the ending of a dream that started 25 years ago, and it had to be like that. I thought it was the right thing to do.
So yeah, the first 52 minutes or so of this film are just set up and kind of way too long. But to quickly give a rundown of the characters, there's Dino Trainer Owen, former business ops manager Claire, and Blue the Velociraptor. But like, it's a nice raptor. We're also introduced to newcomers Franklin, the tech specialist, and Zia, the paleo vet. Oh, and Ian Malcolm also shows up momentarily because nostalgia. There's a lot of that. But the audience is then whisked away to the Lockwood estate. Here we are introduced to Maisie and Grandpa Lockwood. Lockwood is the founder of InGen. InGen's an interesting situation because it's actually a really important element to the novel Jurassic Park, but it's not really in any of the Jurassic Park movies. There's just a quick Easter egg reference in the first one. But then here in the Jurassic World movies, they are really given the focus that they're due. So let's talk about the estate for a minute, because this place is nuts. It's like Dracula's castle if it also had a museum attached to it, and also an exotic animal park, and also an auction house, and also a dungeon, and also a secret research facility. It's doing a lot. We get glimpses of it in the first 52 minutes, but it's not really the focus, and its secrets definitely aren't revealed until much later in the movie. But this fits perfectly with the sets from the Universal monster movies. Mysterious, shrouded in darkness, shadows. The estate is definitely old, but it's with modern updates, which creates this ambiguity and a timeless quality. The lighting tends to be low, even in interior scenes, and much of the movie, especially as we get into the real meat of it, is set at night. There are flickering flashing lights, steam, and endless claustrophobic corridors. Industrial, yes, but obscured and unknown. And while the manor is large and has many people working in it, it's fairly isolated. Like, there's not a neighbor's house to run to. So a dark setting, yes, I think we can safely check that off the list. So it's worth noting that there are two definitions to romance, and I think that both are Gothic. The first is, a loving relationship between two people, which I think is what most people think of when they hear that word. This movie does have that. Most Hollywood movies have some sort of like romantic subplot, B-plot, if that's not the main focus of the movie. This franchise is no different. I think most people are in agreement that it's a little forced here. I will say Claire and Owen are, and their relationship is at the very least more interesting than in the first movie. I mean, the majority of Bryce Dallas Howard's interviews for the first Jurassic World were about her footwear, because there wasn't much else to say about her character.
Jumping into the wardrobe question, I have to, for a second.
Yes!
The heels phenomenon.
But here, after the disastrous events of the first movie, Claire has turned her type A personality towards conservation, and Owen is, I guess, living off the grid. And apparently they got together but then broke off screen. It's something, at least. Over the course of the movie, of course, because of the dangerous situations that they are in and the close proximity to each other, they come together and are a couple again. According to an interview that Pat Crowley did, he and Frank Marshall were going for a relationship like in It Happened One Night, a suggestion they got from Spielberg, who was an executive producer, which is considered to be some of the best screwball romantic comedy material that there is. So I understand why you'd want to emulate it. I'm not sure you quite hit the mark on this one. The point is they wanted a little bit of that teasing energy, not exactly antagonistic, but more than a little bit better. I do feel like, considering that they had broken up already, the Philadelphia story was right there, but I digress. Then there's the second definition of romance, which, as the Cambridge Dictionary puts it, is the beauty of nature and human emotions. The dinosaurs are an interesting situation because they kind of exist in this middle ground. They're not exactly of nature because we made them. They're manufactured, especially the hybrids. They never existed in the first place. So the narrative shifts from, hey, we probably shouldn't make dinosaurs because that would be disastrous for them and for us, to, okay, but if we have, how do we ethically handle the moral implications and make necessary adjustments. The reason it lands here, in my opinion, is Maisie, as she is revealed to be a clone of Lockwood's deceased daughter, Charlotte. The question is reframed when we suddenly have to consider what it means for a human. Maisie, in the film's determination, is a living being who deserves to survive, so the dinosaurs do as well. And that comes with a lot of emotion. So yes, romance in both senses of the word. So I want to start by defining supernatural. To me, supernatural usually falls into a fantasy or horror category and doesn't really have anything to do with sci-fi. Like even the show Supernatural, there was one episode where they made it look like it was going to be aliens, and then we get to the end of the episode and it's fairies, because fairies is more supernatural than aliens, because aliens are not supernatural, they're science fiction. But if you pull the definition of supernatural from the Merriam-Webster dictionary, it states of or relating to an order of existence beyond the visible, observable universe. I'd say, considering that we do not actually have technology that can make dinosaurs or dinosaur hybrids, this does qualify. People have even tried to use Crichton's method to make dinosaurs because he worked really hard to have a really sound basis for all of the science in the book. I guess they didn't read to the end, but unfortunately we cannot get DNA from that long ago, so we can't make dinosaurs. It is an existence that would be beyond the visible, observable universe. On that basis, the entire movie is basically just non-stop supernatural forces. And while the movie chooses not to include ghosts or demons, I would say that the cinematic language used to present the villain dinosaurs is basically the same. May I present my favorite scene from the movie and what inspired me to make this video in the first place? I mean the melodrama. I mean the score. Like, okay, no one's gonna be able to top John Williams, but if you can't get him, Michael Giacchino is a pretty good substitute. Like, he's a master of like genre and subgenres, and he knew what this was. This wasn't just like a horror movie or a sci-fi movie. This was a Gothic tale. And like there's a choir and scuttling about on the roof. That is just what Gothic monsters do. Aside from that, there's this mystery surrounding Maisie, which cloning we can do. I bring it up because it makes me think of like Jane Eyre or Rebecca. Neither of those books, though they would be considered to be Gothic literature, actually have anything supernatural happening in them. It just seems that way until you find out what's actually going on. Well, they're not horror, they are Gothic. Although I would say what Mr. Rochester is doing to his first wife, to a modern day, audience, does seem pretty horrific. But at the time it wasn't supposed to be seen quite the same way. So I'm editing, and I just wanted to pop in real quick because I called out Mr. Rochester and Jane Eyre, but I was also talking about Rebecca, and Maxim, the main guy in that book, kills his first wife, and that's arguably worse. So I thought, that was probably worth mentioning too. But the reveal and the unraveling feels very similar to those stories. What we've been told about Maisie just doesn't match up with what we know about her mother. There appears to be something supernatural surrounding Maisie and Charlotte, when actually it's just advanced science that most of the general public won't have any dealings with. But all in all, even without the Jane Eyre cop-out, I think that this does, incorporate supernatural forces. Terror is an extreme. No, but they do run the gamut. You see this reflected in Gothic cinema a lot. It's the sort of performance that might seem absurd or over the top, but fits in a Gothic context. And the movie is so long, you really do get to see all of the characters go through some sort of emotional moment. The heartbreak of Owen, Claire, Franklin, and Zia as the dinosaurs left behind die in the volcanic explosion. Owen's shock when these obvious villains kidnap Blue and then use a tranquilizer on him. Claire's continued wonder at the miracle that was the creation of the dinosaurs in the first place. Franklin's determined if Wilde resolved during his bid to sedate Dr. Wu and free Zia, and Zia's panic as she realizes the remaining dinosaurs are all in danger. Which is to say nothing of Macy, who has to deal with the loss of her grandfather, the bombshell that she's a clone, and the heartbreak of recognizing herself in the dinosaurs. Claire's intense conflicted sorrow stands out in that same scene. She's spent the better part of the last 3 years trying to preserve these creatures, but letting them live will have major implications, and ultimately it's not a trade that she's willing to make. Owen could be doing more, just saying. Okay, so I guess we need to define antihero now. I'm pulling this definition from literarydevices.com, which states an antihero is a main character in a story who lacks the typical heroic qualities of bravery, courage, morality, and the special ability and desire to achieve for the greater good. The antihero is thus still the protagonist of the narrative, yet is a foil to the traditional hero archetype. So think characters like Heathcliff in Wuthering Heights, or the Phantom, Eric from The Phantom of the Opera, or Frankenstein from Frankenstein. Like, all characters that suck a little bit. Like, they, enact cruel revenge, or do murders, or play God, resulting in murders. This is not the same as an antagonist. In the case of an antagonist, they are just in conflict with the goals of the protagonist. They have opposing goals. So in some cases, the antagonist can even be like the hero of the story, but we are supposed to in some way kind of relate to, or at least understand, the motivations for the anti-hero, even, if we're maybe not necessarily like rooting for them. But the big difference is that usually the anti-hero is the protagonist or a protagonist, if a movie has more than one. So my argument here is a little bit bonkers, but go with me. According to the Jurassic Park wiki, there is an antagonist in the first Jurassic Park movie. It's the T-Rex. Now, for this to work, you do have to consider her to be a protagonist, but her entry does. Apparently, her name is Rexy, and the animatronic's name was Roberta. And the article argues that she starts out as an antagonist, but by the end of the movie becomes an anti-hero. Which, yes, sounds like a reach, but it's true. When the characters first encounter Rexy, they have opposing goals. They want not to be eaten, and she wants them to be eaten. But by the end of the movie, when they are facing off against the raptors want the humans to be eaten, and Rexy wants to eat the raptors. I understand the motivation, which is survival, and I have sympathy for the character because I would rather that the raptors get eaten than the people. All that to say, Rexy does in fact appear in this movie, or at least a descendant, and she definitely appears to be more like an anti-hero than an antagonist. First, she saves Owen from what I believe is a Carnotaurus, and then, too better to eat our bad guy, Eli Mills, and destroy the capsule with the DNA, then Rexy. I rest my goddamn case. Oh yes, the old standby, the female victim. Deeply baked into the Gothic framework is the female victim, and there are many in Fallen Kingdom. And this is in no way restricted to Jurassic Park and Jurassic World. Of course, this is true of most horror and many action movies having, women in danger. As far as actual death goes, I'd even say it's a, lower count. It's not zero, but it's lower. And given the nature of the film and modern cinematic landscape, the male to female ratio is a little more even. Claire is constantly in danger, but so is Owen. Zia is constantly in danger, but so is Franklin. Everyone even has the appropriate footwear. Even so, Claire is the one who ends up with the mangled leg, so Owen can go an action hero all over the finale. And again, Maisie kind of tips the scales to a certain extent. While she's not the protagonist of the movie, she is arguably the central character. And you gotta have a kid in these Jurassic World movies, but it did get me thinking, what if, it had been a boy instead of a girl? Would that have actually made any difference? Or what if there had been a duo? In the first Jurassic Park movie, there's a little boy and a little girl. I don't know that I would usually feel that this matters. There aren't really any inherent personality traits that, wouldn't translate from a female character to a male character or vice versa. But in this case, I actually do think Maisie's identity is intrinsically linked to her being a girl. For one thing, she was cloned and birthed by Charlotte. Charlotte herself is also a victim as she dies before discovering a cure for her disease, which women dying of bizarre diseases, can you get more Gothic? And Maisie, as the Frankenstein's creature of the film, was brought into existence to be the idealized female character. Her shared intelligence with Charlotte ensures that she will be scientifically brilliant, but the disease has been removed. What remains is an exact copy of the creator. Both the scientific perspective, as she had a hand in resurrecting the dinosaurs, as well as literally carrying and birthing, creating Maisie. Therefore, Maisie's character does not need to die. As a matter of fact, Charlotte's death dictates that she shouldn't. But Maisie, sure as shit, still needs to be terrorized, and that she is. Also, all the dinosaurs are female, so any distressed dinosaurs, I'm looking at you, Brachiosaurus, are in fact female victims. There are no literal nightmares in Jurassic World Fallen Kingdom, and I think Jurassic Park 3 illustrates why there shouldn't be. In the traditional sense, these are absent, but I do think that it's interesting to explore the vision of what the park was supposed to be like and what the, world with dinosaurs in it was supposed to look like, while juxtaposing it with the nightmare reality of what it's become that we are now being presented with. Hammond is brought up multiple times, and they've really retconned in Ben Lockwood to the extent that he was part of the original Jurassic Park project from the beginning. Again, the novel has a basis for this, since InGen, who Fallen Kingdom tells us Lockwood founded, was a major element in the story, but Lockwood himself was never mentioned until this movie. And I feel like this change was surely made just because they no longer had, access to Richard Attenborough, rest in peace. But I'm willing to go with it. It's just that Lockwood is very obviously meant to be a stand-in for Hammond. The point is the two of them are visionaries in dreaming up this dinosaur utopia, but not unlike Frankenstein, they fall into the trap of messing with life and death and playing God in a way that they really shouldn't. But we know from the beginning, because we've seen the other movies, that things went south really quickly and there were flaws in their plan, and that turned it into a nightmare. Why they even made a Jurassic World after what happened in Jurassic Park is wild, but the difference between the family-filled theme park of the first Jurassic World movie and the abandoned ghost town of Fallen Kingdom is stark. And that's not to mention the intention of the villains of the film, who intended to capture the dinosaurs to sell on the black market. And do we even need to bring up the hybrids? I think that was more Wu than Lockwood, but still, the dinosaurs are dangerous enough. What are you doing? So there are lots of visionaries. Some of them are good guys and some of them are bad guys. One of the things that I do think is interesting is Lockwood and Hammond in the movie, but not in the book, are meant to be good guys. But in the book, Hammond is a lot more nefarious and calculating and greedy. When he decides that he's going to try and create the park again after the first one is failing, the story immediately punishes him for it. He, spoiler for this book that's 25 years old, but he actually dies. He gets eaten by a pack of compies. These dinosaurs that he created end up being his downfall. Side note, compies are my favorite. They're super cute. There's no Bertha in the attic or Renfield in the mental asylum, but let's circle back to Wu for a second. Scientists famously suffer from madness in Gothic novels. We see the likes of Dr. Frankenstein and Frankenstein. We see Dr. Jekyll in The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. We see Dr. Moreau in The Island of Dr. Moreau. And I mean, the black turtleneck is a dead giveaway you're a mad scientist. Dr. Wu is interesting. He has a small role in the first Jurassic Park movie, and then we don't see him again until Jurassic World, but then he is in all of the Jurassic World movies, and he even gets a nice little redemption arc, but we're not there yet in Fallen Kingdom. I also don't know if I feel like it was necessary for this character to be Wu. He acts to me slightly different from the character that we see in Jurassic Park. He had a very specific set of guidelines that he didn't really appear interested in coloring outside of. I kind of see this as a situation where they could have created a new character, but they were looking for more elements to tie it back into the original Jurassic Park trilogy. It felt like the character had to be a little bit different. I'm not mad at it. It's like they had to make some adjustments. And we're never upset to see BD Wong. However, he again is characterized differently in the novel, and this version of that character is more Crichton Wu than Spielberg Wu. The theory for this character being the mad one versus, say, like the antagonist of the film, Eli Mills, comes down to motivation. Mills is motivated by greed, plain and simple. He doesn't care if his actions result in thousands of deaths when there's so much money to be made. Wu, on the other hand...
What are you doing? This animal is not for sale.
Not only is he emphatically not in it for the money, he's the epitome of the iconic line from the original Jurassic Park movie.
Your scientists were so preoccupied with whether or not they could, they didn't stop to think if they should.
If Hammond and Lockwood are the visionary aspect of Frankenstein, then Wu is the literal creator and sees what he's doing as art.
A wolf, genetically, is barely distinguishable from a bulldog, but within that gray area is art.
He's also the only character that I could visualize like screaming, "It's alive!" like Frankenstein does. And from the Jurassic World movies, we know that Wu is the one who was most preoccupied with the idea of gene splicing, which created the hybrids, which seems wildly unethical, but he's way more interested in like how far he can push the science. Then later on in the movie, he captures Zia and attempts to make her draw blood from Blue, even threatening to kill her until Franklin intervenes. This is not the behavior of a sane person. This is madness. Also, if I'm understanding the timeline correctly, he would have been at least partly responsible for the D-Rex from Jurassic World Rebirth. It's so stupid looking. It's a dinosaur. Why doesn't it have a nose? Even at the onset of the film, when they're venturing to Isla Nublar, actually, side note, since the first movie, we've been pronouncing it Isla Nublar. Now, I don't speak Spanish, so I don't know necessarily how this is supposed to be pronounced. I'm struggling to find a straight answer, and this could be a situation where, like, we now know that that's a mispronunciation. Like the T-Rex, we now know that its vision was not based on movement. The movies just kind of like skirt around that. Is this the same thing? Have like we've been saying it wrong the entire time?
The debate over Isla Nublar rages on.
Regarding the de-extinct creatures on Isla Nublar.
Or did this movie somehow make it all the way through production with multiple people mispronouncing Isla Nublar? But as I was saying, at the onset of the film, when they venture to the island, there's a cloudy, smoky atmosphere, compliments of the volcano about to erupt, and the opening sequence features a wild storm. This is an effective tool in Gothic monster movies as it further obscures the danger. Hell, Dracula can turn into fog. And to harken back to my point about the movie's dark setting, even the interior shots employ smoke and flashing lights to simulate lightning, which is to say nothing of the actual lightning. And the rain adds to the tension when they're outside, and their path is all the more treacherous due to the slippery conditions. The climax of the film pulls out all of the stops with a heavy downpour that provides the perfect atmosphere for what has at this point become a monster in the house narrative. Roll the clip again. So we don't have prophets or witches in the movie. We do kind of have a wizard. We also have a chaotician. This little speech from Malcolm offers some foreshadowing for how the movie will end and where the franchise will go from here, essentially operating as a prophetic warning. Fallen Kingdom focuses more on the gene splicing due to the dinosaurs. Jurassic World Dominion, and I don't want to get too deep into that as it's a totally different beast, but it does show how the technology is used to genetically engineer locusts and how the motivation for that is, again, purely fueled by greed. But the prophecies don't end there. We also get this gem from Lockwood.
Did my mother ever visit the park?
She would have saved them all.
Maisie, as she's the genetic clone of Charlotte, acts as Charlotte would have in the end. While she's incapable of saving all of the dinosaurs on the island, she can at least save the ones that have been brought to the estate. There are no curses, but we do have the next best thing. Comeuppances. Mills gets eaten by the T-Rex. Some of the auction guests are headbutted to death. Ken Wheatley and Gunnar Eversole get endoraptored. If you're on the fence about whether Lockwood is innocent in all of this, he's murdered by Mills. So there's no Castle of Otranto-style prophecy or Dorian Gray-esque curse, but for the contemporary sensibilities and narrative structures, Fallen Kingdom is Jurassically Gothic. One more for the road.